Hi, everyone. Grant, why don't you start?
That's all right. Hey, everybody. My name is Grant Cox. I'm here with Vex Robotics. I'm the marketing manager at Vex. Been doing a lot of the behind the scenes work as we're getting into the 2015 Build Blitz. I am thrilled to be here for our most exciting event so far in the Build Blitz, Karthik's strategic analysis. Each year, strategy is an incredibly important part of the design process and of any game, and Recycle Rush is no different at all. So we posted an incredible blog post this afternoon entitled Karthik Strategic Analysis, in which he breaks down the game piece by piece, bit by bit. So without further ado, Karthik, take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Grant. Hey, everyone, welcome to the first, and as Grant says, the most exciting thing we've done in Build Blitz so far because it is the only thing we've done so far. But hey, I will take what I can get at this point. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to walk through the strategic design process for Recycle Rush. I thought there was no better way to try and introduce teams to the game and what's going on here. The strategic design process that we used here is the process that I've done presentations in the past at the first championship, and this year I did a webinar on it. If you go to the blog post, there's a link to that webinar, and there's also a link to the PowerPoint slides explaining the strategic design process. But it's a pretty straightforward thing. Now, we did make some initial assumptions for this process. If you're familiar with any of the strategic design stuff I've done, a lot of it is resource-based, where you're trying to build within your resources. Of course, within the FIRST community, there's 2,900 teams with a varying set of resources. So we try to do this from the perspective of a team who's kind of, what we'd say, a mid-tier team whose goal at any regional or district event is to make the elimination rounds as an alliance captain or as a first overall pick. So that's the kind of framework we're talking about here. If you're expecting, a strategic analysis and to try and figure out the plans of what an Einstein-level team is going to do, that's really not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to do something that's more for the entire masses. However, we are going to have an open Q&A at the end of this where we can discuss, we'll take questions on all sorts of things if you want to talk about some higher-level analysis. But right now, we're looking at simple ways for teams to succeed and what teams can do on a moderate set of resources. So the first step in the strategic design process is to do game analysis. And you do game analysis by breaking down the rules. This means you need to fully have read the game manual. If you have not read the game manual yet, I urge you to pull it out and start reading. Actually, stop watching right now, and this will be archived. You can watch it later. Stop watching right now and read the game manual. That's how important this is. It's like absolutely critical to everything that's happening here. So you read through the manual, and the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out what your goals are. So we're going to go in with the assumption, again, the goals that teams who are watching this have is to win and to make the alliance, make the elimination rounds as a first pick or an alliance captain. So the first thing we had to do was look at the manual and see what's rewarded this year. Because in the past, it was pretty straightforward. Your goal was to win matches. However, as Frank said during the kickoff broadcast, there are no wins and losses this year. This is so important because it's fundamental to everything. It's a fundamental change. The goal this season is to score as many points as possible. The ranking sort this year, teams are ranked based on their average number of points scored per match. More points, the better. So if you're on the field with another alliance and they score 17 points and you score 18 points, that's nice, but that's kind of a low score. It's not about just getting more than your opponent. It's about doing better than everyone. So it's always about maximizing your score, maximizing your score, maximizing your score. In past years, the next thing you would have to look at would be the first tiebreaker. However, there's something very interesting this year. With average score being the first sorting mechanism, you got to think about this. In matches, if you look through the point values, you can kind of see there's a range between about 0 and 250 points that teams will be scoring. The actual scores will follow a normal distribution across from wherever the average score is, something that we need to determine. But regardless, wherever the average score is, there's going to be a bunch of different scores around it. And when you play 10 to 12 matches at a regional, and you add all those scores together, suddenly you're going to have a wide range of scores. So before, teams were ranked on a win-loss record, where teams were either going to have 12 wins, 11 wins, 10 wins, 9 wins, blah, blah. So basically there was like 13 possibilities. So of course there were going to be a lot of ties. But now with there being thousands of possibilities of scores, the number of ties is going to be severely decreased. As such, looking at the second tiebreaker, which is cooperation points, isn't really that important. So for the purposes of the strategic analysis, we're saying that the sorting mechanism that you care about is your total score. So to simplify, score a lot of points. That's what you need to do. So now that we know the objective, we need to look at every task in the game that can score you points. But it's not just every task that can directly give you points, because that's easy. You just go to the manual, you look at the scoring section. But you need to look at the tasks that can lead you to scoring points. So, sorry, I just got a little bit freaked out there. I saw the screen go black. I was like, did everyone go away? No, everyone's still here. Hi, Grant. Um,
Sorry to freak you out.
no, that's okay. But so I like to try and distinguish these things as overall tasks and strategic tasks. An overall task would be, for example, creating a cooperation stack, while the individual the strategic tasks involved in that include driving, manipulating a tote, and lifting a tote. Those all combine together. So in the blog post, you can see I gave a list of a whole bunch of different tasks in the game. It's not every single task in the game because we didn't want this strategic analysis to be a replacement for the analysis done by the individual teams. So we put out there an analysis with an initial set of restrictive assumptions, and we covered a lot of stuff, but by no means is it all-encompassing. So we really expect teams to kind of go through this process themselves and fill in some of the gaps that we left. We wanted to leave some fun for you. As every professor and teacher I ever had would say, the rest is left as an exercise to the student. In this case, the rest is left as an exercise to the teams. But we put together this entire list of things, and then we had to rank them. But how are we ranking them? Because we're ranking strategic tasks based on what? A lot of people like to say, oh, well, you want to do the tasks that lead to the most points because our goal is to win, and winning this year is scoring as many points as possible. However, it's really, really important to consider the amount of effort that's needed to complete all of these tasks. The tasks that have the most points aren't necessarily the best for a team. The tasks that offer the biggest bang for most effort with the least amount of most points with the least amount of relative effort, those are the tasks you want to be doing. So we're really examining the ratio between reward to effort. And so, again, in the blog post, we have a full breakdown of all this stuff, and I kind of want to talk our way through these sorts of things. So, again, I don't want to go through every single point in the blog post because, again, it's there for you to read, it's there for you to understand, but I want to go through the major ones. So I'm going to skip right ahead into the priority list. So, number one priority in the game, drive. This is almost always the number one priority because every overall task needs you to drive. If you want to get a robot set, you need to drive. If you want to score a garbage can, you need to drive to get the garbage can and put the garbage can up. Every task involves driving. It is so important. It's got to be your number one priority. This is where you have to focus a good chunk of your resources. Now, disclaimer, warning, warning, danger, danger. Yes, you could build a robot without driving this year. Actually, there's some really crazy things you could do without driving if you think of it in a crane. Since there's no size limits this year, you could build a giant crane that just kind of swings around, does awesome things. However, that's a bit beyond the scope of what we're talking about today. Remember, we're talking about teams with an average set of resources. If you're going to build a giant factory on the field, takes a lot of resources. Factory building is not easy. I don't even know why I need to explain factory building is not easy. That's like an obvious statement. But yeah, either way, drive is important. Drive has got to be your number one thing. It's involved in everything. This year's game, though, is different than past games because there's no robot interaction. So a lot of assumptions we have about drivetrains are kind of being thrown out the window. Over the next couple of days, we're going to be releasing a drivetrain design guide and philosophy for Recycle Rush specifically, which is going to talk about a lot of these things. So keep your eyes out for that. It's going to go over what assumptions you need to get rid of and what changes you need to make in your drivetrain philosophy to play the 2015 game. So next up on the priority list, was manipulate and plow containers. Now this seems like an odd one because if you, just the ability to move a container around doesn't actually give you a huge amount of points. It's only really good, like manipulating containers without any other skills, i.e. lifting them or having a stack, is only really useful during the autonomous period. So why would this be so high? Well, there's some important factors to consider here. The autonomous portion of the match is 15 seconds, and there's only a certain number of tasks you can do. And a lot of them are very complicated. The first one is creating a robot set, and you get a robot set by, hey, we got a special guest joining us, Paul Copioli, FIRST design guru and president of FIRST Robotics is here. Hey, Paul, so we're just kind of walking our way through the strategic analysis that we put online and going through the priority list. So welcome and thanks for joining us, buddy.
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
right.
I've been listening. I've been listening to the list. So
awesome. So Paul's here to help this analysis, and he's going to turn in his thoughts, as they come along. So right now we're going to be talking about why manipulating and plowing containers is so high on this list. So like I said, during the autonomous period, you want to find a niche in the autonomous period. Now, just driving straight is obviously something you can do to create a robot set, and that's going to be the most basic amount of points. However, teams are going to be looking for the edge here. Now, you have to remember, the autonomous tasks this year of a robot set or a container set or a tote set, that requires all three teams to do. Well, it doesn't necessarily, the robot set requires all three teams to move, but the container set might require each team to do one container and move it. So you don't want to be the team that shows up at an event that cannot manipulate a container during autonomous mode, because then a lot of alliances are going to be relying on this, and this is going to be very integral to getting picked. So the reward is not just a point reward. The reward is like that base level of functionality that teams are going to be expecting from you to make the elimination rounds. So that's why we said having the ability to manipulate or plow these containers is going to be super, super important. Also, the ability to just kind of plow or push a container or kind of just kind of loop it and move it, not necessarily the hardest thing. Now, I say that because normally just pushing objects is easy. Once you team start prototyping, you might learn some different things. I've taken a look at these garbage cans, and when you flip them upside down, there's actually kind of like a tread pattern on the bottom of that actually locks with carpet kind of tightly. So during your prototyping, you might realize that pushing garbage cans is a lot harder than it seems, and this sort of stuff might move down your list. Next on the list was the ability to manipulate and plow totes. This was also placed high on the list because it's an easy way to get placed during the autonomous mode. So all the same logic I just talked about with containers applies. However, why is it lower? Well, one, it's worth less points in the autonomous mode, and two, there's going to be some alliances that don't want you to push the totes during the autonomous period because one robot's going to want to go for the stacked tote set in autonomous. I forget what the term is already. So that's why pushing a container is more valuable than pushing a tote, because there's going to be some alliances that don't want you to push the tote because they're going to want to grab one, grab two, grab three, stack, move it to the auto zone. So after that, we're still pretty much all the top things on this priority list are things that do not require active mechanisms. Again, because this is stuff that is so simple, that's why it's higher on there. Because you can get almost all the benefit that you get with an active mechanism, but with maybe like 1/10 of the effort. That's why it comes higher on this. Remember, reward to effort ratio is what we're talking about. So the next one is the ability to plow totes onto the scoring platform. There are a lot of totes on the field that start in positions that you can get access to and then push them on. Your human player can drop them onto the field, and then you can do some pushing. This is a little bit harder than just pushing them down the field because you do have to get them up an incline ramp. How hard is that going to be? Well, you can tell by the prototyping you're going to do, but also the Build Blitz team is currently working on a guide about how to kind of basic manipulation of these game pieces, including pushing them around. So be sure to check that out, which is going to give you some ideas and some hints. Because, again, plowing this up a ramp that's going from carpet to HDPE, there's going to be some discrete sort of things there. Are you going to want to put a little pinchy on it and maybe lift it? I don't know. But, again, these are the sorts of things you need to be thinking about. Plowing the litter is next. The point values for these pool noodles are not high at all. However, plowing litter does become important because this stuff can get in your way. And if you don't start thinking, if you don't make a plan for how to move this stuff around, you will end up with a drivetrain that gets pool noodles all caught up in it, and that's not going to be a fun thing for you. They're going to shred, they get caught in your chains, they're going to get caught in your gears. So having a way to just kind of plow the litter out of your way is not just important in terms of scoring values, but it actually ties into your number one priority of your drive, and that's why it ended up this high on the list. All right, our next one is lifting totes onto the scoring platform or step. Now, we're not necessarily talking about stacking yet, but just the ability to acquire a tote somehow and lift it. This can help in many ways. You can use this to score totes, or you can use it to help get towards the cooperation points, because being able to put a tote on a 6-inch step is a discrete skill from the other skills in this match. And there will be some teams who have no ability to do that. So even if you can just put one on there, it might make you a huge asset for cooperation, which the points for cooperation, 20 points and 40 points, are really big when you look at the grand scheme of everything in this match. So you cannot ignore that. We said we weren't going to talk about cooperation as an overriding factor because it's not like 2012 where it was a huge part of your ranking, but the points required for it are still major. So the ability to take a simple tote and get it on that step has value. Now we're into the more active type mechanism stuff. Stacking totes. Why is this so low? Because you think about this. This is a stacking game. Everyone sees this game. They think it's stack, stack, stack. The reason that stacking totes has fallen this low is that you cannot stack totes unless you can do the stuff above it on the priority list. You need to be able to drive. You need to be able to kind of manipulate the tote and push it around and get it out of the mess or get it away from the human player. And you have to be able to acquire it somehow. Remember, you're not just going to be able to stack a tote without a plan to acquire it. Acquisition can be done by picking it up gathering it off the ground and into your robot, or catching it from the human player. Either way, it requires thought. So it's not just kind of like tote is magically in your robot, let's stack it. But stacking is very important because the biggest points in this game are for placing cans on top of totes. But you're not going to place a can on top of totes unless you have a stack of totes. And that can's value is directly proportional to the height of stacks created. So stacking is important in that case. Stacking is important in the autonomous mode. Stacking is important for cooperation. So stacking is very important. If you see it as 7 on this priority list, you might be like, wow, that's so low. Also remember that the top 6 things on there are not super hard game breakers. So it's all stuff that you should naturally be able to find your way to do. Number 8, lift and place cans. Why is this lower than totes? Because you're thinking cans are worth so many points. However, lifting and placing cans is only useful for the scoring platforms, while stacking totes also is useful for cooperation. That's an important thing to remember. Also, right now, I kind of think that stacking totes seems to be a little bit easier than lifting these giant garbage cans around. These totes are a little bit more stable. I think that stacking totes is going to be easier that way. That's where I kind of put it with this ratio. You will determine a lot based on your prototyping and based on your investigations into the game. Remember, as you start thinking about lifting and placing these cans, you're going to have to do a lot of prototyping. This is a brand new game piece that none of us have ever played with, so any assumptions that we're making while coming up with this priority list might get dashed by prototyping. Next up, we're going to talk about reorienting cans. This is not something that there is any point value in, but remember, we're talking about tasks that not only get you points, but tasks that can lead you to getting points and assist along the way. These cans will most likely be easiest to pick up in the upright orientation. Yes, there's ways to pick them up when they're down on their side, but most teams are probably going to pick them up while they're upright. So having the ability to write a can may make you a very useful alliance partner, and that's why it's a skill that's valued enough to be on this priority list. We're coming down towards the end. Number 10, driving over the scoring platforms. Normally, when I say drive is the number one priority, I say drive is the number one priority. You want the ability to cross the entire field with impunity, have nothing in your way. However, this year, these platforms, you need to go over them. Looking at the field and the way it's laid out, you can hit most of the strategic areas on the field without necessarily driving over these platforms. Driving over these platforms also not necessarily the easiest thing. It is going to take some specific design trade-offs to be able to do this. Paul, do you want to talk more about the difficulty or the challenges in getting over this platform?
Yeah, sure. In the last few years, we've had games where small wheels were king, right? 4-inch wheels, low ground clearance, and there were no real objects to go over. These platforms, these scoring platforms, are like at 16 degrees, I believe. They're 16 degrees, and let the lowness of that platform fool you. 16 degrees is the second or third highest degree of angle that we've had to encompass over the last 10 years, maybe 10 years plus. The only biggest one that I can recall is in 2006. That one was at like almost 20, I believe. I'm going off of memory. But this is not something to take lightly, and especially because this is one of the first times we've had a multi-degree of freedom ramp, meaning we have slants at 90 degrees angle to each other, so there's this corner that you have to go over. And 4-inch wheels, even the kit dry base is having a challenge with that. So I would imagine that people are overlooking that, and I suggest highly to look at the geometry of the 4-inch wheels. They're really not adequate without doing something different to your dry base than you've been doing before. So the challenge of the scoring platforms, do not take it lightly. You will find yourself beached.
Right. And so one of the neat things that we're doing as part of Build Blitz is we're going to be releasing some resources on how to use the KitBot, the AM142U. I always forget the name, but the KitBot drivetrain, and how to convert that to make sure it goes over these platforms. And also just a drivetrain philosophy guide that will give you some tips to ensure that you're crossing those platforms if you choose to. However, if you want to go with a standard drivetrain and skip going over these platforms, that is very doable in this game. Like, I know it kind of looks like a maze that you kind of just want to jump over these walls, but you can easily zip around and avoid them, especially if you were to do something like a holonomic or a mecanum drive this year, which is going to be more popular because, again, remember, there's no interaction, so there's no one to push your mecanum drive around. So it's, there's possibilities here. But again, we're going to be talking more specifically about drivetrain in these various posts. So tune in to buildblitz.com and follow us on Twitter to see all the amazing things that come with it. The last thing that I want to talk about in the priority list is removing cans from the step. This is useful because it gives your alliance more cans to score. Now, some people might say, 11 on the priority list. I think this is absolutely huge. It could be a big deal at other points. There are strategic advantages to removing these cans, and it could come into play at a very high level of play. However, that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're talking about here today. What we're talking about is things that a mid-level team can do to help them rank well, and removing those cans isn't really part of that ballpark. So yes, I absolutely think these cans are going to be removing these cans could be an important part of the game, but it's not really what we're talking about here. So that kind of covers the main tasks in the game and where we rank them and where I kind of see how everything's going there. So, Paul, I've kind of given like my basic strategic analysis here. Do you want to add kind of special thoughts that you have or anything that you would like the two of us to discuss right now?
Yeah, so you talked a lot about being able to move totes around, move the cans around. And I think that that's one thing that many, many people are going to take lightly because, I mean, come on, you're just pushing a flat bottom thing around. But if you've played at all with these totes and these bins, these recycling cans, recycling bins, which we call RBs or RCs because we're lazy, don't want to say the whole word, those are really hard to push around. They're not easy. I mean, they're not super difficult per se, not like stacking a stack of 6, but if you think you're just going to be like, I just do the dry base and we'll move them around, that may not be the best case. So don't take anything lightly, and don't say, we're only going to be able to maybe stack 1 or 2. Stacking 2 is huge for your alliance. If you can get stacks of 2 going, and you're just even partnered with somebody that can do a recycle bin, that's a significant amount of points over a single stack that's just pushed around. So don't believe that you have to have a 6 stack to win this game. There's so many totes, and it's a linear scoring, which I know you're going to get into a little bit later, Karthik. So having a bunch of these 2 or 3 stackers, if you can do them fast enough, you don't need to have the 6 hires.
Well, it's a really interesting point that Paul brings up, and it's always good to look at history and look at past games. But, I mean, there was a stack game in 2003, and it's not a direct analogy to this game because so many teams ignored stacking because you could play defense that year. But even still, the stacks that year, the amount of 6 stacks that were created during the season just by a robot, there was like maybe less than 10, period. And so stacking is hard. However, like Paul said, the scoring in this game is linear. So having 3-2 stacks with cans on them is the same as having a 1-6 stack kind of dealio. So that is a huge thing to remember, that stacks don't necessarily have to go big. The other thing is, don't be afraid of super, super high scores, because chances are, like, it would be very easy for a team to be like, oh, there's no way we're ever going to stack 5. Just forget about stacking. We're just not going to be valuable at that. Yes, but teams kind of overestimate what can be done in this game, in every game. If you look at 2013 is my favorite example, where everyone's like, oh, well, all the elite teams, they were doing 6 or 7 cycles a match. At the championship, the top teams that were making the elimination rounds were actually only doing about 12 discs a match, which was working about 4 cycles. And across the championship, the action was doing about like 6 discs a match. So these numbers were super, super low. And so the ability to do a bunch of 2 stacks is actually going to be really, really important, because these scores aren't going to be as high as people are thinking. So it's fundamental to this game that you remember that these small tasks that seem simple and can earn you, where the point values don't seem so high, they are actually higher than you may be thinking. I'm thinking average qualifying scores at regional level, aside from the whole politics and pool noodle agreement stuff, I'm thinking like you're looking at the 40 to 50 point range. So if you can do stuff that can contribute 12 to 18 points, that's huge. Paul, thoughts?
Well, did you say politics?
That is the term we've been using on 11-14 to describe the nonsense of, hey, I'll put some pool noodles down for you if you put some pool noodles for down, but don't do it to that team. Politics.
Yeah, so my thoughts. I'm going to do my thoughts a little bit on the politics. So this is analogous. This is a game about littering or picking up litter. But I find it ironic that if you're my neighbor and I put garbage in my backyard and you agree to put garbage in your backyard, we both get paid. That's really what the litter or pool noodle agreement is. It's like an easy way to get $40, right? I mean, 40 points, easy way.
It would basically be if I was to get a tax credit for not putting out too much garbage at the end of the year. I put all my garbage in Paul's backyard. Paul puts all his garbage in my backyard, and we both get tax credits. Yay, stupid government! And that's kind of
what but even better. Don't even waste your time lifting it over the fence. I'll just agree to put mine in my backyard. You agree to put yours in your backyard, and we both get the tax credits, and the effort's easier. So to me, this pool noodle thing that we're talking about is actually another way to get cooperation points. Really.
Yes. And
so do it that way.
Sorry, I think my feed is breaking up a little bit. But yeah, the pool noodle portion of it is just that's a very really kind of strange portion of the game. Anyways, at this point right now, I think it'd be a good time to kind of see what questions the community is asking. So Grant, do we have many questions coming up via social media or via the Q&A?
More so one of those than the other. So if you are coming to us on YouTube, there's a small yellow box in the bottom left corner of your screen that says Be Part of the Conversation. You can click that, and it'll take you to the Hangouts on Air page, where you can actually use the Q&A app in the Hangouts on Air to ask us questions directly. The other option was going to be you can tweet us at BuildBlitz or hashtag BuildBlitz. But as Karthik and I were talking about before we started, I think Twitter is actually down right now, like all of Twitter. So as a replacement, we also have posted the link on our Facebook page, facebook.com/buildblitz, where you can ask us questions by commenting on that Facebook post. And of course, we're also watching Chief Delphi in the Vex Pro Build Blitz thread. So we are here for the conversation. Love to hear what questions you guys have. So the first one I'm going to go to came through the Q&A app. Came from a Jesse Knight. He's asking, how do you think it would be best to utilize what he calls a box on wheels type partners, or maybe the teams with less resources during qualification rounds? Karthik,
Well,
you're suited to answer
yeah.
this.
Well, there's a lot of really neat things this year. So, like, remember, there's no size limit this year when you start the match. You transport your robot to the field at one size, but then you can expand. And this opens up some really neat possibilities on what you can do with a team. So, say a team comes to a regional and they didn't really end up with much functionality. They kind of just have a kit bot. How can they get you points? And you want to be able to say, oh, we'll just put them somewhere where they can kind of plow something for you in autonomous mode. But plowing, as we said, maybe not the easiest. So consider this option. Consider taking a rope and tying one end of the rope to their chassis, and then looping this rope around one of the containers that starts in that starting zone area, and tie the other end of the rope. It's like a lasso. Tie the other end of the rope to that chassis. If this chassis can just drive forward now, it can drag that container into the auto zone for you to help you get a container set. That is a simple add-on that you can do for almost any team. I'm thinking if you really want to be cute with it, add just like 2 little Ethernet ports to your robot and then plug in an Ethernet cable, take an Ethernet cable to the other side, plug it in, drive, go. So that's a way to get points out of the term box on wheels is a little bit offensive, but you know what I mean, a team that comes with very little functionality to get them to do something for you in autonomous mode. I do think that it's smart to start considering how to affix various plow-type devices to help teams, these box on wheels, move containers and totes and plow them around. So you might want to come up with functionality like that. But those are the sorts of things I was thinking of. Paul, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting strategy. I think that more importantly is these teams with the box on wheels or the less resource teams, maybe they got registered late, or they started working on their robot late. They didn't really, that happens every year. I think it's up to some of the teams that have been around a while to try to find a way to make easy passive devices that can help them push those bins rather than do the tug and pull where that bin's out of play pretty much the rest of the match, or it's attached to that robot. I think that because of the loosey-goosey size restrictions this year, that there's going to be an easy way to put simple passive mechanisms on the front of a robot, box on wheel type robot, to get them to push either autonomous bins or autonomous totes or autonomous bins, the green bins, to get the autonomous points, or at least to clear them out if somebody wants to make an autonomous stack. So I think that may be the more likely scenario, although I do think it would be hilarious if there was a lasso robot on the field.
Something to consider with this game, and this is like, big picture about the game. By eliminating the robot interaction, in one way things have been made easier for a lot of teams, in that they don't have to build as robust, and they don't have to worry about, big bad defense robots smashing into them or ripping their arm off or that sort of thing. It allows teams to create neat, intricate offensive mechanisms and not have to worry about protecting them. So that's really cool, and that makes things easier. However, a lot of teams relied on defense as an easy way to contribute to an alliance. That option is no longer there, so that has made the game harder. Also, with these objects possibly being difficult to push or plow, that's also made the game harder. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this game evolves and find out what the overall difficulty level ends up being. Grant, any more questions?
Nope, that was it. No, I'm kidding.
Okay. You had me.
There's one question here from Ben Jiang. He's asking, how valuable would a robot specifically specializing in stacking totes be in this competition? And I know you touched quite a bit on, the value of specifically stacking totes or stacking shorter stacks all around. So I'd like to expand this to maybe a question about specialization in general as it relates to Recycle Rush.
Well, specialization is always important in a game like this where it's going to be very difficult for a robot to perform every single task. This is a hard game. So the Swiss Army type robots, the ones that just kind of do everything, there will be some, because there are some amazing teams in FIRST who can just do that, but I don't know that there's going to be a lot of them. And I think at the regional level, there are definitely going to be some teams that focus just on stacking totes, and there's going to be some teams that just focus on placing garbage cans on top of totes. So I do think there is big value in being the one who stacks the totes. Now, it's valuable for two reasons. One, you're getting points for every single tote that you're stacking anyways, and two, it allows for that huge point bonus when you add the can on top. So I would value just stacking totes over just placing cans, because the just placing cans is more reliant on there being totes. However, the just placing cans may end up being more valuable because it might end up becoming more scarce. So that sort of thing is going on. The other reason why just stacking totes could be important is that's a big point value task if you can figure out a way to do it in autonomous mode. Stacking 3 totes in auto, not going to be an easy task, but if you can do it, hey, that's huge points and a huge way to differentiate yourself. And also it allows you to, if you have the ability to place that stack on the step, you could be a part of those big co-opetition points.
Very cool. Paul, do you have any comments you want to add? I know you were the big advocate for lots of small stacks.
Oh yeah, I mean this is a specialist game, all right. So in the quals, if you can stack and you can do a lot of stacks, you're going to be a huge benefit to the bin specialist. I think there's going to be bin specialists, but again, it's risky to be a bin specialist. It's going to be great in the playoffs, but because you're probably going to get any of the best stackers are going to want to be your partner, but the stackers are going to really control the flow of the game because my gut feel on risk reward is that the totes are a much better play. I think that if you simply specialize on totes, and with all the practice, there's no defense in this game, so you could literally practice your routine over and over and over again. And if you can't stack high, you stack fast. And like I said, from a pure stack, if you take the bins out of play, or you take the recycling bins out of play, it's the same, right? So 3 stacks of 3, is the same as a stack of 6 and a stack of 3, or a stack of 4 and a stack of 5. So you could do 3 and do them lightning fast. You're in great shape. You're in great shape.
Very cool. Everybody say hi to Dan Visconti, by the way, who's walking past while I'm live on the air. All right, thanks, guys. That was awesome. You also touched on Brian O'Sullivan's question about specializing in container acquisition versus tote acquisition. So
right.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian, as well. Next up, a lot of people are asking. This is getting a little bit specific. But Paul, I especially think since we have you on the air and you have some solid mechanical background here, you'd be suited to answer. A lot of people asking about Omni wheels, Mecanum wheels, driving sideways in general for this year's game. Can you guys comment on that at all? Some specific questions have been the weight distribution when holding a 50-pound stack above your head on Mecanum wheels. Everybody's wondering about the bump, how Mecanum wheels handle the bump. Do you guys have any insights there, or how that should factor into team strategic analysis?
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that one. So I'll come right out and say I personally am not a big fan of Mecanum wheels, but I have seen many teams utilize them in a great way. I've seen many teams utilize them in games where we had huge bumps. I mean, 624 in 2010, I thought had a very innovative. They used Mecanums and they said, look, we're going to be a midfielder. We're not going over the bumps, and they were very maneuverable. But again, that didn't have a lot of weight transfer. The CG is an issue no matter what kind of wheels you have. Like I said, the scoring platforms are multi, two-dimensionally, angles. So you can go up on one corner, you go up on an edge. I mean, it's going to be much easier to go up on one wheel in this game, and mechanics will have some difficulty there with lateral control when that happens. But again, if they stay on the flat surface, they have the same challenges as everything else. I think we're going to see a lot more Omni wheels this year. I think we're going to see a lot more teams that they can go side to side. The last game that I remember that really had objects on kind of the opposite side of the field in a long line was way back in 2000, and the robot that one of the only robots that could go sideways absolutely dominated because they could pick up those game objects along the wall super fast. I think that teams that are able to master the side to side on those totes will have some advantage. But again, for the most basic team, for the the middle, like you have a certain amount of fixed resources, you have a certain amount of mentors, you have a certain amount of students. Not an overwhelmingly high amount of any of those things that I've talked about. I think that practice time is better than that. Just straight up, don't worry about moving laterally. Do what I call the point and click. Grab your game object, turn, drive again, grab your game object. I think if you can grab the totes quickly, the difference between not reorienting and what we call sliding versus pointing and clicking is at the most basic level going to be a small difference.
Just to add on that, I agree with a lot of what Paul's saying. If you think back on a philosophical level, like I've been one of the strongest proponents of the community of always doing a six-wheel drive and always just doing tank drive. And the reason I've not been a fan of holonomic or mechanism drives in the past is because drive I always have my number one priority, because if all else fails with drive, you can still play defense. And defense has been such an important part of these games, and also the ability to hold your position while being defended. Well, guess what? There is no defense in this game. There's no robot interaction. So a lot of the reasons that I didn't like holonomic and mechanism drive, a lot of those preconceived notions are kind of stripped away. So I think there's definitely more value to those drives because a lot of their inherent weaknesses are now removed. So, but at the same time, I do think that there is still something counterintuitive about moving sideways. And a lot of robot drivers, especially with a mechanism robot, where any robot, if they're not going to go as fast sideways as they are going to go forward and back, the driver's just going to turn and point it and go whatever's fastest. So you do need to be aware of that. It does take some conditioning. So there's still inherent difficulties and inherent weaknesses with those types of drives. However, it's greatly reduced this year. So the gap between a standard six-wheel and any sort of omnidirectional drivetrain is greatly lessened. And I think for some teams that the agility advantage and the ability to skirt around the field might be a deal breaker for them. They might go in that direction.
Very cool. Thank you guys both. Very interesting. Excuse me. I have a question here from Andrew Gurick. I apologize for not pronouncing your name correctly. He wants to know, do you see putting litter in these recycling containers as a valuable method of scoring? I'm going to preempt this answer by saying I noticed it was not on your list of top priorities, Karthik. So maybe if you could expand a little bit on how you made that determination.
Sure. So again, the priority list was not intended to be entirely encompassing. So we did leave some blanks. Being able to score litter is something that was on the task of offensive things. I kind of left it out because I kind of wanted to not focus on that area. But I do think human player scoring of litter is not if you can bring, because one of the things is I think a lot of teams are going to stack from the human player. The human player has 30 totes and can just drop those onto the field, and they're right there for you. You go boom, 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 stack. So if a robot picks up a can, comes, human player starts feeding some totes, build a little stack. Now their can's kind of elevated a bit. Then maybe the human player can kind of drop that pool noodle into the can. However, that opening is small, and it's going to be like threading a needle. So it's not necessarily going to be easy to just kind of get that thing in there. So even with the human player, it's difficult, but I think it's reasonable. With robots, I mean, the task of grabbing a pool noodle from the human player and then positioning that into a garbage can from distance and just trying to get that accurately done, that's a really, really difficult task. And I think it actually might be more difficult than stacking. Like in the FIRST Robotics Competition this year, the game involves stacking cylinder sections. And they're allowed to do this in a protected zone that's right by a human loader. And even still, these teams are having a difficult time doing this. So when you're talking about big robots and you're holding a pool noodle that you're trying not to crush, and it's really hard. So I'm definitely not saying that it's not viable, but it's difficult. Now, maybe you want to make a robot that goes to the human player and then catches a couple pool noodles, and then you drop them in the landfill. You want to be the garbage man and just take the stuff over there. That's a way to score points too, but I think there are other point values that are higher and have less effort required than that. So that's why it's kind of something that I chose to not focus on. But I do think you need to do some analysis, play with the points, and see where it fits in for you. But there will be some teams who manipulate litter for points this year, that's for sure.
I am going to be less political than you. If you're listening to this broadcast or watching this broadcast, you better not manipulate a pool noodle with your robot to try to put it in the top of that can. Okay, let's say FIRST does something about the noodle agreement, the litter agreement, and
the politics.
What's that?
The politics.
The politics. Let's say they make the red alliance put red tape on theirs, blue alliance put blue tape on theirs. Fine. I would rather spend the entire design time, practice time, teaching a human player how to throw a pool noodle, whatever, 40 feet, 37 feet, 31 feet, whatever it is, than making a mechanism to do that. That's worth 4 points. It's 2 points less than the putting it in the bin, and it's a parallel path. The robot can still be scoring while you're doing that. If FIRST doesn't do anything about the politics, then it's even easier. You get them to slide it through their hole, you slide it through yours, done. That's 40 points. Don't even worry about making a mechanism. So if you're thinking about putting the pool noodle on inside the hole on the top of the recycle bin, there's really only one way that you should even consider doing that, and that is via the human player. Me personally, not even considering it.
Yeah,
all right.
And there's a reason it didn't show up on the list. So.
Yes, as Paul so eloquently explained. We got a good one here from Alex Meschler. I need to start picking people based on ease of how to say their last name. But Alex,
be on the broadcast.
that's absolutely true, Mr. Canna thing. He wants to know how you think the game will change from qualification matches to playoff matches, and how, if at all, this affects your strategy at this early in the season.
Okay, so for the basis of the teams that we kind of did the initial assumptions on here, where the goal is just kind of to get into the elimination round, it doesn't have too much of effect at all. Like for what we were talking about in this priority list, it's because the gameplay is so similar, where it's just scoring points. The only place where things change is you may want to work on denying your opponent points and how can you deny your opponent points in this game? Is to restrict access to the shared game objects on the step. So that's the change, where I think in the finals there will be some strategy going on where teams are trying to race to the game objects that are shared.
Okay. Paul, do you have any comment on that? Or
I mean, I tend to agree with Karthik, but if you're designing the ranking system is score the most points. The playoffs are score the most points. If you don't count the upside down bins, there's 18 easy to get to bins, and then another 30 totes, and then there's another 30 behind the player station. So if an alliance can score 48 totes, that's a lot of points. And I don't think if you could do that, No one's going to be able to do that. But if you could do that, the stuff in the middle doesn't even matter. This game is simple. Outscore your opponents. They cannot influence. They cannot influence 48 of your totes, 10 of your pool noodle litters, and 3 of your recycle bins. That's a whole lot of points that they can't do anything about.
I mean, unless you're going to build a giant fan bot that can knock down stacks.
Please don't do that.
That's great. There was another one here. Here it is. That I really am partial to. This is from Paul Richardson. And this wasn't necessarily touched on specifically in your strategic analysis, but I think it can relate a little bit to it. Do you think there could be a role for game piece feeder robots like there was in 2012, or as I would like to amend in 2008 as well? Very valuable.
Yeah, I think so, because those totes that are on the playing field that are in that kind of massive wall, those might be hard to get to because of how they're all kind of stuck together. So the human player is a really valuable place to get objects from. And so I think there's something to be said about possibly having a stacking robot, which is going to be kind of stationary right by a platform and someone passing totes over. But I do think that it's also very easy just to pick up from the human player, build your stack there, and then kind of take it over. So I don't think it's a huge thing, but I do see where there could be some niche for it. Maybe bringing a robot that specializes in moving cans and bringing them to the stacking robot platforms. But again, that field is so small, that half of the field, that it's not really saving you much time. So it's not like you're bringing objects from across the field.
Yeah, I think maybe a tote dragging robot. I think a tote dragging, just to get those totes out from the log jam that they are, could be useful. But again, like Karthik said, if that thing's going to drag totes, they might as well just drag them up onto the scoring platform.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about assister robots and robots that are delivering game pieces, it's usually meant to cut down on your number of trips that you make across the field. And for example, 2012 would be the best example, where you get a bunch of balls and then you just kind of shoot them across the field to your partner robots. Again, with the field that you're playing on being so small this year, I think there's less of a need for that sort of thing.
Okay, very cool. Got a question here. We're getting kind of close to the end, about 5 more minutes. Remember, if you want to get those questions in before we finish, on the YouTube video, you can click Be Part of This Conversation and join the Q&A app. Looks like Twitter is back up and running, so you can also tweet at BuildBlitz or hashtag BuildBlitz, and we'll see it there as well. I've got a question here. Not a lot of people in the Q&A, at least, are asking about cooperation, but you did bring it up a few times. Jack Nowakowski is curious, what's the best way to work with an opposing alliance to coordinate cooperation bonuses maybe before the match in terms of pre-match strategy?
Well, I think you want to first of all do some advanced scouting, figure out if any of the robots on your opposing alliance have the ability to put totes on the step, and figure out if the robots on your own alliance have ability to put totes on the step. And then if that ability exists, you want to figure out how much of the ability exists on each alliance, and based on that, you want to figure out if one robot's going to move 3 and one's going to move 1, if 4 different robots are going to move 1. But then, knowing those abilities, talk to your opponents and kind of say, hey, do you want to do this together? Because it's going to get us 20 or 40 points, and if they have the ability to do it and it's not going to affect their gameplay, then I think it's kind of a natural sort of thing. I think there will be some teams who aren't eager to cooperate because a lot of teams want to showcase skills that will be valuable in the elimination rounds so they can help get picked. And since cooperation is not an elimination round skill, that may make some teams shy away from it. But there's a lot of points on the line there. And so this is one of the reasons why just being able to lift a tote, at least 6 inches is a very, very valuable skill. Because if you can just drop one tote on there, if your opponent has that dominant robot who's going to build a stack of 3 in auto, and that stack's right there, and then they're going to move it on, that one tote becomes a huge part of getting 20 points. So I mean, it's about communication early with your opponents. Well, opponents because you're not really playing them, and it is something that's benefiting everyone in the match. So it just kind of makes sense to do it if the skill set is there.
Yeah, it's completely different than Cooperation in 2012. It's completely different. I mean, Cooperation in 2012, you actually had to make, in some cases, in many cases, you had to make a decision to break off and lose the match in order to get the Cooperation points. It is completely different here. Like, Cooperation points, especially the stacking one, right, is the single highest point getter, right? It's 40 points.
Yeah.
So it's not like, well, do we cooperate or do we win or lose? It's, well, no, we're just going to get 40 more points. So I'd be very interested to see why a team, if they were able, an alliance, wouldn't cooperate, because there's no disadvantage for you other than some obvious ranking ones towards the end of the qualifying rounds.
Yeah, like aside from the let's screw over team A, B, C, D, like if the ability is there, it makes the point values are so high, it makes sense to go for it. So you would think that it wouldn't be that hard of a sell.
All right, very interesting. All right, we're coming down to the wire here. We've only got time for maybe one or two more questions by my clock. This question isn't particularly strategy oriented, or at least in relation to your post, but people are clamoring for it on the Q&A. Bumpers versus no bumpers. How much, with no defense, how much do you consider the risk of your own alliance partners or your interaction with the stacks or things like that? Just comment on the new bumper and robot rules. This was spurred by Mark Williams. So
sure, I'll give you my strategic comments on it, and then Paul could possibly give some more mechanical comments. But
sure.
if there was an allowance for bumpers, because before the robot was 120 pounds plus bumpers. This year your robot is 120 pounds, and if you choose to make bumpers, they're included in that. I am not wasting weight for the off chance that I have an idiot partner who's going to smash into me at high speed in a small, tiny field. So, people used to build robots in FRC without bumpers in games where there was high-speed contact and robots survived. With no contact and the only fear being of your opponents, like, I'm just not going to waste the 10 pounds of weight or 15 pounds of weight. Like, that could be put into a mechanism. Like, if you look at all the things on the priority list, there's so much to do, and stacking's not easy, and lifting cans not easy. That's going to take a lot of weight. There's no chance I would put bumpers on my robot. Like, maybe I would. No, I'm not. Just no chance. Like, and if I have a jerk partner who's going to start smashing me intentionally on my own alliance, like, then there's way bigger issues in play. So no.
All right, Paul.
Yeah, not a chance. Not a chance. Look, it sealed the deal. I would have considered it if it was outside the weight allowance and outside the size allowance, because practically, there's this transportation, size. Well, unless you're going to have like a collapsible drivetrain, you got one of your dimensions has to be 28, and so I'm not going to eat into that dimension. I'm not going to eat into my weight. And how many years did this would be so easy if we didn't have bumpers? Well, I mean, you're going to put a bumper on the front of your robot? If you're going to do stacks? No, it's just going to get in the way. So it's like, if you're worried about as Karthik put it, the idiot partner running into you, that means you have to put bumpers all the way around. It's to me, a huge disadvantage to have bumpers. But again, I'm a little bit biased because the only time that a robot that I'm involved with is going to have bumpers when it must have bumpers by the rules.
All right.
Yeah, I think putting bumpers on your robot in this game is the equivalent of like the weird, awkward kid whose mom makes him wear his snowsuit in June because of the snowstorm.
Someone's
That's
going
a very
Someone's going to cut that quote on top of a robot with bumpers, Karthik. So
Yeah,
thanks a
that's
lot.
right. I put a little kid in a snowsuit like Kenny. Like,
Yeah. Awesome. Well, very clear answers there. We're right up against the time here, so Karthik and Paul, I'll start with you, Paul, first. 20 seconds or less. Final comments on Recycle Rush.
A single robot that can score 15 game objects is going to be extremely dominant.
15 game objects. Got it. Karthik, 20 seconds or less. What do you think of Recycle Rush?
I think that there are a lot of people in the community who are not a fan of this game right now because of the lack of defense, and I understand that change is difficult to accept, and we've had great games with defense and such. I am going to miss defense. However, I am really looking forward to some of the side benefits of there being no defense, and one of them is the lack of involvement of the referees in this year's game. Last year's game, I had a lot of heartache and a lot of frustrations with how much the referees were involved and how hard of a job the referees had to do. And this year, I think our referees can take it easy. They have a much easier time, and it'll be nice to see matches decided on the field based on skill, not based on penalty flags.
All right. I think Paul won based on brevity, but very good point as well. So that concludes our Karthik Strategic Analysis live Google Hangout. Remember to keep an eye on buildblitz.com, where we're going to be posting blog updates all week as our teams go through their 7 areas of focus they've identified as key elements of this game. They're very similar to Karthik's strategic points, manipulating game objects, driving. Driving is a huge one. We'll be breaking down some of the geometries of going over the bump and maybe offering some solutions as well for that we think will help you with that. Twitter @BuildBlitz, Facebook.com/BuildBlitz, basically all those social media /BuildBlitz, and we'll be there. Karthik, Paul, thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll catch you on the playing field.